It's time for our weekly chat with Elliot Tepper from Carleton University. Every week, Elliot joins us to talk about the big stories in international politics. Good morning, Elliot.
Good morning, Mark.
Good to see you back. I know you were off a little bit while I was away.
Yes, good timing. We were off at the same time.
Yeah, but you were not feeling well. I'm sorry to hear that.
I'm calling it the Great Toronto Flu Bug, and as part of that, I lost my voice, which made it very hard.
Yes.
But I hope to make it through the half hour today.
Okay. I'm sure things will be fine. And there is a lot to talk about, as always. And let's start with what we heard this week about the president and his trade representatives' plans for NAFTA.
Yes, we now do have a major news story involving Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. The renegotiation of NAFTA is now officially underway because the trade representative has done as he has to do under the agreement. Remember, this is an agreement passed by Congress, and Congress put in there, it's a North America Free Trade Agreement, that if you're going to change it, the trade representative has to notify Congress and give advance notice. So here's what they want to do, and 30 days later, negotiations start. The various stories that we're covering today, I think, has a big picture that's been missed a bit, and that is, if I have a theme for the day, is it's all about jobs, because we're going to also be talking about Donald Trump later because it's inevitable. So let's go back to the NAFTA. What's going on? I think a lot of the quick reactions are now catching up to, I think, the key elements. We're going to hear a lot more from the trade representatives. I'm waiting for Derek Burney to weigh in and others. So people who really help negotiate the original and who are full-time trade specialists. I'm a political scientist, and that's the lens through which I view this. One of the biggest things is that there's been a change in the purpose and focus of the free trade agreement. That is, initially NAFTA was all about the free movement of goods and services, freer and freer, and that's why it's a free trade agreement. The new one, Article number 1, opening sentence, and also the preamble, it's all about the deficit, the trade imbalance between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, or more broadly, between the U.S. and anybody. This administration, the America First administration, says if there's a trade imbalance, we're being ripped off. There's something wrong. Now, I'll leave The Economist to examine that. I suspect that's
if I can jump in here for a moment, if you go back 10 or 20 years, there was a very simple equation to trade all over the world, and that was that the United States ran a trade deficit with almost every country in the world, that Americans imported more products than they exported just because the American economy was so huge and growing and people were buying lots of stuff from all around the world. That was
and it was considered a good thing, by the way.
That's kind of how the world's economy worked.
Strength. Yeah. Also, the big one now is China. What's going to happen there? And the Chinese use that money, that surplus money, to buy American debt. They buy the treasury bills that keep America, the lights running and the government and so forth. So it's a lot more complicated, but this is, and that's a point I want to come back to, because remember, I'm a political scientist. This is a lot about politics. This is a very simple equation that can sell. If we're going to deal with our neighbors and anybody else who trades with us, they've got to be fair. It has to be reciprocal, and the way you measure fairness, says Donald Trump, is it's in balance or we have a surplus, and therefore what we see in front of us with NAFTA, and I want to come back to this a bit later, but also everywhere else in the world is a lack of fairness, and we're going to fix that. So the purpose has been reformulated, and then all those points that come afterward relate not to the freer flow of goods and services, actually they do in substance, but to fulfill that goal. So I think that's a big point that should be emphasized. Then others are now picking up on some of the things that jumped out at me as I first read it. I was commenting within less than an hour after they were released. But some of the key things are that America has laid out what could be considered a straightforward negotiating agenda. That's all to the good, because initially there was an attempt to rip up NAFTA. That was a pledge. We're going to tear it up. So the good news is we're talking about a renegotiation. And what's in it? Well, what's in it is a lot, and the trade people are going to get there. But one of the clauses said that every sector of the economies of the NAFTA partners has to be open. That is, every sector of Canada's economy has to be open to American investment. That includes those that we protect: banking, telecommunications, culture, and of course agriculture, a big ticket item. And Brad Wall is already fighting back on that one, the premier. So that's a very important thing. I think is what jumped out at me and now others is the elimination of the conflict resolution component. They call it Chapter 19. Every trade agreement has to have a way to resolve disputes that have come up, and the one that was negotiated when NAFTA first came into force was this setting up of panels. Canada almost walked out, Mark, over this issue. So, what could stop this renegotiation? The stumbling block last time was finding a mutually acceptable mechanism. This is not mutually acceptable to the United States. It's in writing. It's got to go, with very vague comments about what should replace it. So that's very important. I jumped immediately also to the buried down. It's almost at the very end of this document. There's a phrase in there saying that America reserves the right. It's actually a very interesting phrase, but preferential purchasing agreements that the U.S. has in place are going to be exempt. Well, what does this mean? On the one hand, all of Canada's sectors of the economy have to be open, but, and there's two of them in particular, the Buy America clauses, which are there, and also defense procurement, both of those very important to the Canadian economy in terms of Canada's capacity to compete equally. So all of that is there, and there's more.
Yeah, and that one in particular, I think a few people have zeroed in on as being a potential double standard, right? That it's going to be, American companies can bid on Canadian government contracts, but Canadian companies will be restricted in bidding in some cases on American ones.
Yes, the U.S. will counter with some phrase that, no, they're not the same thing, it's apples and oranges. But the point is that America has reserved for itself large sectors of their economy that others, Canada, cannot take part in under a free trade agreement. And I think that's a very fair comment. And Canada will, this is open. This is a negotiation. You don't get what you deserve. You don't get what's fair. You get what you negotiate. So we should back up and say, how's Canada doing? Keeping in mind this, that Canada has been laying the groundwork for dealing with America since Trump got elected and dealing with precisely what's now immediately in front of us, the renegotiation of NAFTA. Politically, immediately, the Trump administration having been just elected, not yet in power, Canada opened up a political channel to the highest reaches, to the inner circle of the Trump administration, Bannon and Jared, and later with Ivanka. So very full court press. The ground has been well laid. After that, moving to the private sector, mobilizing resources. And as you know, the Prime Minister went to Rhode Island to address the Governor's Conference just a few days ago, and he's the first foreigner to address them, and he was very well received. So mobilizing the resources available to Canada has been very well done. This table has been as well set for Canada as you can get. I'll give you just one quote. This is from the Governor, Scott Walker of Wisconsin. Now, he is a Republican icon. He's right-winger and so forth.
Yeah.
And this is a dairy state, and dairy, of course, is on the table. What did he say? He said that after meeting, I think NAFTA needs to be improved, not blown up. For the business in Wisconsin, we want to make sure that our largest market in the world is still accessible. That message has been well delivered to Republican Democrats, to private sector. The key measure that Canada has been taking is to use the key words here, jobs. That never mind trade imbalances, what this is all about is creating jobs. Canada creates jobs in America, and the U.S. creates jobs in Canada. It's win-win. So let's start the negotiations with it's all about jobs, not about trade imbalance. And that, I think, has been very well done.
All right. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Russia, Donald Trump's second meeting with Vladimir Putin at the G20 summit. Also, it was something I mentioned on the show yesterday, the fact that the White House and the Trump administration had to basically certify that Iran was complying with the nuclear deal that Donald Trump campaigned against. It must have been an awkward thing for Donald Trump to have to do. He's done it twice now since the election. We'll talk more about that coming up with Elliot Tepper on Ottawa Today.